Beads that are only drilled on one end, sometimes called fringe beads, offer us lots of unique design possibilities. Today I'm going to show you how to use these kinds of beads to create a sunburst or flower pattern coming out from a central bead. There's a few engineering tricks that I've figured out that I think you'll find helpful. Hi there, Sandy here. Welcome to another jewelry making video at keepsakecrafts.net. So I saw a video online where somebody had a piece of jewelry that was pretty cool. They had beads like this, only arrayed under the bottom half of it. And I got it in my mind that, so it was kind of like this. And I thought it was interesting, but I got it in my mind that I wanted to accomplish this. And it was actually trickier than I thought. Because if you have a pendant with beads hanging from it, then they're going to behave and hang down. But as soon as you have them on top, well, they just start to flop over. Here's a little example. I'm going to show you how to do this one, and you can see the bottom ones are hanging and behaving pretty nicely, but the top ones are just all over the place. They're not doing that sunburst or flower pattern that we want. So how to do that? I spent a lot of time experimenting with wire and trying to figure out how to make it work. And what I came up with is to use a bezel and some epoxy clay. So first, the beads that we use. These are, as I mentioned in the intro, end drilled, or sometimes they're called fringe beads. And I have lots more. These are check glass mini daggers. Got them in several colors. Let me show you in a color you can probably see better. You can see the holes are right there. They're on the end. So when you string them around something, they're going to stick out a bit, like these ones that I put around that purple bead I just showed you. So any bead like this, you can experiment and try this technique with. Some are going to work better than others. You just experiment. So there's these are, like I said, the mini daggers. I've got a bunch of those. There's also riso beads, which are very similar, just a slightly different shape, but they're also drilled on one end. They're riso, or like a piece of rice. There's also magatamas, which they're kind of thick. They're almost like whenever I look at these, I think of a slice of biscotti, because it's an oval loaf that it's sliced from on the diagonal. That's kind of what those make me think of. But they're drilled on one end, so if those were stacked, you'd see that side if they were strung around, which could be interesting. Or big daggers like these. These are from Dollar Bead Box, 7 by 14 millimeter check glass daggers. I'll have links to as many of these as I can find links to at the post. The other thing you'll need, of course, is the bead that goes in the center. And I've got a few different choices here. These are some really pretty pressed glass beads. I've got these kind of gold dipped beads. Here's some jasper. Even these would work. These flowers are so pretty. I have these smallish ones, and I think this one also came in a recent Dollar Bead Box. You might notice that there is something all of these that I've chosen have in common, and that is that they are flat, unlike this one. Because what you need to do next is find a bezel that your bead is just a little bit smaller than. So like that would be good for this one. I think this, some similar size to this, is what I chose for this one. And it doesn't have to be an exact measurement, smaller or larger, just as long as the bead is a little bit smaller than the bezel, and you'll see why in a bit. Now if you use a round bead, and I was kind of playing with this here, this is just some polymer clay that I'm using to test things out. The thing is, we're going to use epoxy clay. I don't know if you can see behind this. There's clay that the bead and the daggers are embedded in, and that is what keeps them out and perky instead of flopping over like in this one. I'm using the polymer clay just to test quantity, But if you have a piece of clay in your bezel, and then you put in a big fat round bead like this one, if it's got beads wrapped around it like these daggers, you can see how high up that hole is where those daggers are going to be coming from. The only way to maybe use a bead like that would be to use a deep bezel. So something like this might work better. Even that is still a little high. Or one of these that's made, it's made for a Rivoli, so it's got the deep point. So really practice first with the flat beads, and then if you want, you can try to experiment with the big round ones, or maybe a smaller round one. So, how do we do this? You just need some wire. Now I used a 26 gauge wire here, but if I had it to do over again, which I don't because the epoxy clay is dry, I would have used a finer gauge wire that would show up less. There's a couple of points that I wasn't happy about, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. This is just some really fine wire. This is like 30 gauge. It's thread-like, very fine. And you don't need a ton. Just depends on how big around your bead is. So I've got maybe 8-10 inches here. Let's make a little room so you can see what I'm doing. So grab the bead that you want to build these around. I'm going to do this one. And center it on your wire, more or less. Now this part will take a little bit of trial and error figuring out how many beads will fit around half of your center bead. I think I figured this out. I think I need like 11. So here's my 11. Let's see if that's the right amount. I'm going to send it back through the other end of the bead. So you should have a loop of wire going through the bead and around the outside. These things are fiddly. They tend to, especially the smaller ones, they tend to flop all over. But you get it. I'm wondering if I have too many there because it's kind of sticking out from the bead. So I'm going to pull that out and take off one. Maybe only 10. And this is just what you have to do is make an estimated guess, string it, and check it out until you reach the sweet spot where they kind of snugly fit around the bead nicely. Oh, I like that better. That just, and suddenly those just all laid so much more nicely. Well, that's going to be really pretty. I like that. Okay, I'm going to do the same on one of the other wires. Doesn't matter which one. And again, take that wire back through the hole. This is another reason to use pretty fine gauge wire because your bead needs to be able to accommodate 3 passes of the wire. One of the issues I ran into using even 26 gauge, which isn't real fine, it was that this bead couldn't accommodate 3, and I had to kind of come up with something else, which I wasn't thrilled with the results of, which I will show you. Pull that snug, and let's see, that looks good. Oh, I like. On this one, you can see I have wires coming out of each end. That's just the way it worked out. By doing 3 passes, I end up with a wire coming out of each side, which is, I think, ideal. For this one, I could only fit 2, and so I did a little bit of wire wrapping up here, which I may cover up later on. I may make a loop of seed beads that sits right in this space and cover it up. But if you can do it neatly, then you don't need to do that. I don't really like designing things where you have to do cover-ups, but sometimes that's just how it works out. On this one, we can take our 2 wires now. Because it's so fine, I'm going to actually twist them together right behind this gold part, because this is going to be embedded in epoxy clay. So you just don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to hide it back here, And because there's a bead hole here, you're not even going to see that wire back here. If you're using really fine wire, don't go crazy twisting it. Twist it just enough till it's snug, because if you over twist it, it breaks. Which is why I'm not using this one, because I got a little overzealous in my twisting and broke it off. And besides, I put too many beads on that one. So the fine wire is nice because you can just bend it out of the way. So I'll just trim that, bend it out of the way. And now we're ready for our bezel. You can use a fancy bezel if you want, but I think this really takes away from the beads. So I've got just a very plain bezel that's a little bit bigger than my purple oval stone. And what I'm going to use to attach it is epoxy clay. This is the brand Crystal Clay. And here's a trick for you as far as coloring. I wasn't really thrilled when I received my epoxy clay and realized that these were really bright colors, because I was thinking I wanted to do something with black or neutral tones. But you'll notice that this is a pretty neutral brown. And I got around that by mixing these. So the way this works is you have your A parts, which are all your colors. And you have your B parts, which is your hardener. Now you can mix these all day long, and nothing will happen. It will not cure until you mix in the hardener. So you can mix custom colors. I wanted a brown, and so this color, you can kind of see it in there, is just purple and yellow mixed together. Anytime you mix together two complementary colors, you're going to get a brown, a different shade of brown. If I wanted it a little darker, I could have put in some blue. You could get brown by mixing together the green and pink, or even the green and kind of this fuchsia. Just as long as you have all three primary colors in there. So green is blue and yellow, and pink has red, so that should give you a brown. Purple is red and blue and yellow, so all three primaries will give you a brown. So you can keep mixing and experimenting until you have a color that you like for your project. For this one I mixed a neutral, but I think for this one I'm actually going to use the purple. I think it would kind of enhance it and look pretty behind it. Next you'll need to figure out how much clay you need. This is obviously going to be way too much. So this is just polymer clay that I'm using to figure out how much I need. So I'm going to roll a little ball into a bit of an oval, since that's an oval shape. Press it in. That's cracking. All right, press it out to the edges. The trick here is to have enough but not have too much. So you really do need to experiment, and you might as well experiment in your polymer clay, which you can re-roll and use again. And that way you can roll the exact right amount of your epoxy clay, which is not inexpensive. Okay, so I've got, this is the one I want, with the wire on the back. I think I want my gold down. Not that it matters at this point, I'm just testing. Kind of center it, press it in, and see what happens as those beads press into the clay. Now you can suddenly make them behave. And you get this really pretty flower sunburst kind of thing. Now that is obviously way too much clay. You want to have enough so that your side drill beads are in contact with the clay, because that's what's going to hold them in place, but not so much that it's oozing out like it is here. So we'll peel that off, remove some, and try again. If you peel it off and you can see impressions of your beads, then you know that's, you have enough, at least enough. If you peel it off and you can't see any impressions from your beads, then that means you probably don't have enough. They're not touching the clay. I know it's a lot smaller than you would have guessed you needed, right? All right. have a feeling that is not going to be enough. Do make it, when you add your epoxy clay, you will want to make that smooth because it may be visible, a little bit of the edges, so make it tidy. Okay, let's try this again. Now that's, I'd say, pretty close to the right amount. Yeah. Press those beads down, make them behave. That's a really cool pendant, huh? And it's a fairly small bead, and yet now that you've done this, it's got a pretty decent amount of presence. Now I'm not peeling it up from the wire, you might notice, because I did that. That can kind of stretch it, pull it out of your holes, make a mess, and you can see the impressions of the beads. So this is a good amount. I love these little non-stick sheets. I buy them online and cut them into pieces so I have different sizes. Once you've determined the right amount of clay, roll that into a ball and cut it very neatly and fairly accurately in half. And we can set aside one of them. We'll need this much of our A and this much of our B. And that's how you measure it, and then you don't waste it. Once you start mixing it, it's a good idea to just use some gloves. Actually, this kit came with gloves. It was a nice little kit with all these colors of clay and hardener, and you can tell when you're making jewelry with it, you use teeny tiny amounts. So this will last a long time. There was also something in the instructions, because I noticed some of mine was stiff and hard. If your clay seems hard and brittle, keep it in a Ziploc bag and run it under hot water for 5 minutes, and that will soften it. So I thought that was a cool tip. Let's see. I think that's a little big. Yeah. That looks good. Okay. And I got the same amount. Now, I'm going to switch to a different tool. I cut A with this tool, so I don't want to cut the B with that because I don't want to introduce any of the A to the B until I'm ready to. That looks about right. Okay, so I'm going to put on my gloves and mix those. And I don't need the polymer clay anymore. It's done its job. And now we just mix these together. Epoxy clay dries rock hard. It's in epoxy, so although I am not a fan of wearing gloves, I really highly recommend that you wear gloves when you're mixing this. It's only for a little while. I will handle it a little bit for the final assembly. I'm not going to worry about that, but for the mixing where you're really mashing, it just doesn't seem like a good idea to me to get epoxy clay into your pores. Also, this is a pain, it's kind of stiff. Don't be tempted to mix it in your pasta machine, because the pasta machine is not always easy to clean all the parts, and like I said, this stuff dries rock hard, sticks to everything. So you will possibly ruin your pasta machine. Here's my little ball of clay all mixed up. You can see there's no marbly streaks left. Marbly streaks might be pretty in polymer clay, but in epoxy clay, that means you may not get a perfect cure. What I like to do is leave the gloves on and then go wash them with soapy water and use them again. Here's my bezel. So my gloves are just drip drying. It really works well to just wash them while they're on your hands, and then you can, in fact, anything, any of your tools, just clean them up with an alcohol wipe or some hot soapy water. They clean up fine, and then you'll have them to use later on instead of being ruined by epoxy clay. You have about 2 to 2.5 hours of working time once this stuff is mixed. Try to get that centered. And if you're not happy with your initial placement, you can pick it up and move it. When I put this in, I actually put it in upside down, and this back side was a lot messier than the front, and I was like, oh. I pulled it all out, cleaned off the back of the beads, which is now the front, with an alcohol wipe, and redid it. So you can. Like I said, you have 2 hours, so there should be plenty of time. Alright, once I've got my beads mostly behaving, and that's pretty well centered. I'm going to just press a little bit and then press these beads in. So they're positioned just the way I want. Yeah, definitely using the finer gauge wire is better. There's a couple things about this I'm not thrilled with. First of all, right here, I wish I had looked a little bit more closely and just kind of kicked it over at an angle to fill in that gap. Now, did you notice this one? It's just there to fill the gap. It is not attached by wire. It's in there pretty firmly. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm not sure if I need one or two. I didn't do one at the top here. I just seem to need it at the bottom. I'm just going to press that. Yeah, I think I need two to fill in that space. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I really prefer some kind of mechanical connection rather than just having it glued in. That being said, epoxy is a pretty strong glue. Will it hold up to the test of time? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I'll let you know. And so you don't even see as you're looking at it. You might see that there, but you don't really even see that it's not attached by the wire, which I think is kind of cool. Do I want to do it up top here? There really wasn't room up there, but that's largely because I've got these twists of wire here. If I'd done it the same way I did this one, pulling the wire onto the back and then shifted these down, then that would probably have left room for one more up here and filled it a little bit more evenly. Live and learn, right? You know, I think I'm just going to leave that. Yeah, I don't think I need those up there. If you want to hide this edge, if you're not happy with it, just go ahead and string some seed beads on some thread, and then you can glue them right over top of this. Again, I'm not a big fan of gluing things in jewelry, but this is just, I was just solving an engineering problem here. So I think this is pretty cool. Okay, I think it's a fun way of using daggers, mini daggers, any kind of top drilled bead, fringe bead they're often called because they're used at the ends of fringe. And I hope this has opened up possibilities for you for using different kinds of beads and findings in your jewelry and just creating different kinds of designs. Thank you so much for your support. Happy creating.